How much cash should you keep in retirement? A lot of people get close to retirement and realize they've spent years focused on working, saving, investing, living life, and to no fault of their own, but maybe not as much time thinking about how that money is actually going to be used. And that's usually where cash starts getting a lot more attention. How much should be sitting there? What is it there for? And how do you know if it's too much or too little? Now, it depends on the plan, of course, and there's no universal number that fits everybody. So let me show you the framework I like to use. Picture someone heading into retirement with a solid portfolio, decent savings, maybe Social Security is coming in, maybe it's coming later, and on paper, they're fine. But they haven't really separated the money they may need soon from the money that's meant to stay invested throughout retirement, which could be another 30-year window. There is a good balance between what to keep invested for growth and what to hold in a more stabilized bucket. Because if every dollar of spending feels tied to the portfolio, well, then every rough market starts to feel a little personal and heavier than maybe it needs to. So that's where an income reserve or cash reserve comes in. When you're working, income is pretty easy to understand, right? You do a job, you get paid, you pay the bills, life moves along. In retirement, that paycheck goes away. So the question then becomes, well, where's the income coming from now? Maybe part of it is Social Security. Maybe part of it is portfolio withdrawals. Maybe there's a pension in the mix. Or maybe not. But one way or another, the money has to come from somewhere. And using this income reserve or cash reserve intentionally can be a big help mentally and for the plan itself. It's really just money set aside to help cover planned withdrawals once work income is gone. So if you want a simple way to picture it, think of it as giving near-term spending its own lane or its own bucket, its own account even, which is what we'll call the income reserve. That's really the idea. You're not trying to solve everything with cash. You're just making sure the next chunk of spending has been thought through and protected. So to answer the question, how much cash should you keep in retirement? Normally it's best to hold 1 to 2 years, depending on your situation, of planned portfolio withdrawals in cash. And this is separate from the emergency fund because these are expected withdrawals. The emergency fund is for those unexpected withdrawals. Let's use a simple example. Say someone expects to spend about $90,000 a year in retirement to pay the bills, live life, and run the show. And let's say Social Security covers about $40,000 of that. Now we know about $50,000 needs to come from the portfolio, needs to come from somewhere to cover the gap. And this $50,000 here is the number that I would focus on. So how much should we keep in cash? Well, in this example, we'll use a 2-year cash reserve, so $100,000. And I think that's a much better way to approach it than pulling some number out of the air and saying, I don't know, that feels about right, which is how a lot of people end up doing it. That's the shift I want people to make. Instead of asking, how much cash should I have? Maybe ask, well, how much am I likely going to need from the portfolio over the next year or two? And that gives the number some structure. And just to make it feel a little more real, here's how it can show up inside of an actual plan or a balance sheet. Now, these are not real people. These are our friends, Mark and Sarah Demo, but you can see we even like to label this bucket or this account under their jointly held accounts on the balance sheet. And I like doing that because it keeps the purpose clear. We like clarity. It's not just some random cash sitting there, or we don't bundle it all together. This is money with a job, money with a purpose. And as this bucket goes down, as withdrawals are taken for them to spend in retirement, we can replenish it using maybe multiple accounts, a few accounts, one account, depending on their situation and what markets are doing. So it's there to support near-term withdrawals while the rest of the portfolio keeps doing what it's supposed to do over time. And that alone can make the plan feel a lot more grounded. It can also give you more flexibility and control around where withdrawals come from. And that can be a big deal for taxes and not tipping Uncle Sam in retirement. I'm not saying that in like this magic solution kind of way, more in a practical sense, right? Like we just saw in the balance sheet, we can replenish the income reserve from different accounts depending on your tax situation in that year, while also alleviating the risk of sequence of returns or taking money out in a down market from the portfolio. What does that $100,000 actually do? First, it covers the next stretch of planned withdrawals, and we know we have a good runway. And that matters because spending doesn't stop just because markets are having a rough year. And then the portfolio doesn't need to be interrupted every time cash is needed. Now, in a position of strength, as we saw on the balance sheet, we can replenish from multiple different sources, but we don't have to when the markets are down. And lastly, maybe just as important as any of that, maybe the most important, it can make retirement feel steadier. You might feel comfier mentally, less scrambling, less staring at the market or getting that anxious feeling when the market isn't doing well, which if you're going to be retired for 30 years, even if you're going to be retired for 20 years, you're going to go through downturns. The market isn't going to be going up and to the right the entire time. And all this means is it'll be just a lot less, well, this is uncomfortable. So when I think about cash in retirement, it really goes back to that simple question. How much do we expect to need from the portfolio in the next year or two? And that's really a better starting point, not necessarily the end all be all, but a good starting point. And from there, you can decide what amount makes sense in the context of the rest of the plan, the other income sources, the account mix, and most importantly, the person sitting across the table, because this still really does depend. Some people may want a little more set aside. Some people may need or want less, because some may have more income sources doing more of the work. Give near-term withdrawals more structure, so the rest of the plan has room to breathe. And just to say it clearly, this isn't a recommendation for everybody watching. If you're making real retirement decisions, you want to look at your own numbers, your own tax picture, your income sources, and how the full plan is set up before making changes. If this was helpful, I can do more on retirement income, withdrawal strategies, and how I think about the portfolio once work and that income goes away. The best boy ever. Hi, Ollie. You're the best boy, aren't you? He's the best assistant.